Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, September 24th, 2013. Getting into the week, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, top of the news today, of course, is Obama just finished addressing the United Nations regarding Iran and Syria. Basically went down the same claims they've been making all along. Syria used gas against its own people. Iran is a nuclear threat. And basically just sort of, maintaining the official legend. Obama is now trapped by the burden of the accumulated lies. They can't back off and say, yeah, we were wrong, or yeah, we lied, because then everybody starts looking at everything this government has ever said, looking for lies and deception. Of course, that's already going on anyway. But there was a little bit of, I would call it Obama's, poke in the eye at Netanyahu, because he did at least give lip service to the possibility of exploring a diplomatic solution regarding Iran's nuclear weapons program, which doesn't actually exist. But Rouhani did make the overture, saying we're willing to talk, and Obama, because of the perceived intransigence on Syria, as they're trying to derail that deal, I had to say, well, we're open to exploring it. Now, that doesn't really mean all that much, because remember, the U.S. likes to posture and pretend that it's seeking diplomatic solutions. It did that with Libya, it did that with Iraq, it did that with Afghanistan. Again, as we're seeing ongoing here in Syria, the U.S. will talk nice about peaceful diplomatic solutions and then try and undermine them so they can go on to war. Of course, as Obama's out there talking about ridding that region of weapons of mass destruction, what was left unsaid was Israel, which does have nuclear weapons, does have chemical weapons, does have biological weapons, but they're, of course, never to be mentioned, or you're a filthy, dirty anti-Semite. And a reminder, of course, that everything Iran is doing, they are legally allowed to do under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and the United States has signed, and Israel has not. And Israel is the nuclear power in the region. They've got nuclear weapons. They were caught trying to sell them to other countries, which is the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. But Iran is the bad guy, and they're out there. Now, of course, other world leaders are getting ready to address the General Assembly. And somehow I'm sort of figuring that our corporate TV news media in this country won't give the same nonstop coverage to the leaders of Iran, Syria, or Pakistan. We can count on very heavily edited excerpts to try and demonize them, especially Pakistan, which is raising the issue of the continued U.S. drone strikes into their territory, which we know are killing dozens and dozens of innocent bystanders for every one terror suspect that is targeted. So Obama is saying the words to try and make it look like they're seeking a peaceful resolution in Iran, but we know the real agenda driving these wars is reimposing Bretton Woods on the world and making sure that nations with natural resources to sell, like Iran, are only going to sell those resources for U.S. dollars. And so I'm afraid behind the scenes, the push for war is on with all these nations, and Russia's trying to stall it. They're trying to... Russia's being the only adult in the room here right now. And, of course, the fact that Obama is at least tacitly agreeing to diplomatic talks with Iran over the so-called nuclear crisis, and there isn't one, because Iran is not building nuclear weapons and nobody can prove otherwise. But Israel has spent the last few days just, pounding this thing. Don't even shake his hands. If Obama shakes hands with Rouhani, it will send the wrong message. And, of course, Israel's been back on their thing. Iran is just weeks away from a nuclear weapon, which they've been saying going back to 1985. And you need to remember, Israel has a long history of outright lies to get the U.S. to go to war on Israel's enemies. Israel was at the forefront of claims that Iraq had nuclear weapons that turned out to be a lie. when Israel bombed the nuclear power station in Osirak, Iraq. They claimed they did it because there was a clandestine bomb factory in the basement. And after the invasion of Iraq, inspectors toured the remains of the Osirak power station, and all they found was a power station. Israel, of course, when they were attacking and trying to sink the USS Liberty, was sending messages, oh, Egypt's attacking your ship, go hurt them, go hurt them. Lavon affair, bombing of the King David Hotel, goes on and on and on. It's just boggles the imagination why anybody in Washington, D.C. would believe anything Israel has to say about Iran. But, of course, Israel's propaganda about Iran usually comes attached to a very generous campaign donation from AIPAC. And that tells you all you need to know about the U.S. government right there. U.S. Congress, the finest politicians money can buy. Now, Bill Kristol on the Weekly Standard was out there saying that Obama's an appeaser, Rouhani's the new Hitler, and that unless Obama takes the lead in attacking Iran, it will leave Israel as the unquestioned leader of the West. Apparently, to Bill Kristol, leadership means the willingness to drop bombs and missiles. But, of course, we understand Israel isn't going to attack Iran themselves. Despite all their weapons and nuclear arms, you know, basically they're cowards. They want somebody else, like the Americans, to go fight their wars for them. And my comment to Bill Kristol, as is always, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into that plane, and we'll call Iran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. And we did reprise that very lengthy article on thinking that intervention's a good idea. So you might want to copy that off and send that to Bill Kristol and anybody else who's out there screaming, we've got to make war on Iran, we've got to make war on Iran. Apparently that list includes Senators Robert Menendez, Lindsey Graham, Chuck Schumer, John McCain, all good friends of Israel in the Senate who are out there saying, don't fall into Iran's trap. Don't listen to them. These aren't the peace terms you really want. And they're just out there just pushing the Israeli agenda for Americans to go to war in Iran as hard as they can. And I really do think it's time for us to round up all these Israel firsters who think war on Iran's a good idea, and let's parachute them in there. Go make war on Iran. Have fun. The problem is they want your kids to die in that war. And they want you to pay for that war. And they're doing it because, hey, it worked so many times before. Apparently Netanyahu in his speech to the UN is going to compare Iran to North Korea. Ooh, those bad North Koreans. They're pulling out all the stops. They're just grasping at straws, trying to figure out how they're going to get this war back on track here. A very interesting article came over at oilprice.com, and it's kind of a left-handed reason for an invasion, saying that Iran's Rouhani is now driving the oil markets, and that a good reason for invading is so that Iran is not able to influence the price of oil around the world. Well, it is Iran's oil to sell, and the reason oil prices are going up is because of the U.S. sanctions saying Iran cannot sell their oil to the West. That's created a shortage that has driven up prices. Meanwhile, Iran is selling their oil to places like Russia and China, which don't really care about U.S. sanctions. So if somebody's screaming that Iran is driving oil prices upward, it isn't Iran, it's the U.S. sanctions that are doing it. And you are all paying at the gas pump. And a reminder from history, Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years. It is not in their nature. And that stands in a sharp contrast with the United States and Israel, which these days can't seem to go 6 months without attacking somebody. And remember, Israel is a nuclear power. Nobody is going to attack them. We have a couple of articles we reprised to whatreallyhappened.com, including Iran versus Israel, what the media wants you to forget, which is basically that Iran is playing by the rules and Israel is not. We'll be back after these commercials. America, welcome back to the show. So we're talking about the renewed push to sell us a war with Iran because of the Iranian nuclear threat. And Israel has been screaming since 1985 that Iran is on the verge of building a nuclear bomb, and the first thing they're going to do with it is attack the United States or attack Israel. No, Iran isn't that stupid. First of all, as I mentioned before, they are not by nature aggressive. They have not launched a war of conquest against another nation in over 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 revolution that ousted the Shah. Now, documents that surfaced following the collapse of the former government of South Africa, documents surfaced confirmed Israel was trying to sell, probably still is, clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries. There are reasons to suspect that North Korea's first nuclear test involved a device purchased from Israel because the radiological signature collected from that test matched that of a joint Israeli-South African test in the Atlantic. And that's the very activity that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent, just the uncontrolled selling of nuclear weapons around the world. But we're supposed to think Iran is the bad guy. And Israel's out there with a full court press where they've got AIPAC's got their checkbook out there just writing huge campaign checks to anybody in Congress who will support sending Americans to make war on Iran. Now, meanwhile, down in Nairobi, the situation there is starting to get very, very murky. First of all, we had this terror attack, which is dominating the news and taking focus off of the UN speeches being made by the leaders of Syria, Pakistan, and Iran. And now they're trying to build the case, first of all, that these terrorists have a large presence here in the United States of America. And the numbers keep going up and up and up. Looking at a story over at RINF.com, now they're saying this terror group at the mall had 20 American members. And there's already reason to doubt it because the named terrorist that was supposedly from Kansas City cannot be confirmed. Nobody in the Somali community in Kansas City has any idea who this guy was. He seems to have been created out of thin air. So why are they trying to sell the idea of American members of this? Well, because we've all gotten burned out on Al-Qaeda. People say, there's Al-Qaeda in America. Yeah, okay, big deal. Oh, now it's the Al-Shabaab. Be afraid of the new rebranded terrorist threat. And it's also looking more and more. Now, we already know that Israel basically took control of this whole shopping mall. Their officials were there, their IDF troops were there. They just moved in and took complete control of the situation. All the Israelis got out. Family members of the president of Kenya got killed. There may have been a motive on that one as well, because Israel isn't happy with this guy. Now we're getting word that apparently the terror attackers had actually rented space in the mall, set up a phony storefront from which to plan this operation. That sounds pretty sophisticated for a bunch of Muslim terrorists running around the country. It sounds more and more like some nation-state-backed intelligence agency was planning this whole thing. And this article that we saw over here in standardmedia.co is now trying to create a link to Iran. Oh, the Iranian terrorists were in here blowing up things in Kenya. So they're already trying to link this over to Iran. Everybody's short-stroking this as hard as they can. Meanwhile, of course, Peter King is still out there saying the next potential, Al-Shabaab is around every corner. Al-Shabaab is hiding under your mattress. Al-Shabaab is tearing the tags off your couch cushions. And he's warning there's a large Somali-American population in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Portland, Maine. They're fanning this up really hard, and I'm beginning to seriously suspect that this attack on the mall in Kenya is a propaganda prequel to get everybody thinking about Somalis and Muslims and terror again ahead of a new false flag attack here in the United States, probably to take place first part of next month. I think there's a high probability of it, and the only way we're going to get them to call it off is for everybody to talk about it and just say, when the Big Bang happens, we're not going to buy the official story. And when the Big Bang happens, if there is another major terror attack here in the United States of America, it's going to prove once and for all that all this NSA spying and PRISM and Department of Homeland Security and TSA are complete and utter failures. And as they talk about cutting spending to rebalance the federal budget, I think these agencies ought to be the first to go because they're not accomplishing anything of any use to the American people. So now, getting back to the situation with the president of Kenya. Apparently family members of the Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta, just so happened to be visiting that mall during this terror attack. And some of his family members got killed. And it turned out this Kenyan president is not a friend of the West, not a friend of the ICC. And this may be the beginning of opening the door to a U.S. military intervention in Kenya. We've got to protect all those newly discovered oil fields from the evil Muslims. Samantha Power is already out there saying with regards to Syria, we've already exhausted the diplomatic-only solutions. That Russian deal is still in progress. Syria only just now turned over their first list of chemical weapons, which was promptly ignored and declared to not be enough. And Samantha Power is already out there saying, no, we did it. We tried diplomacy. It's been a whole week and nothing happened. The war is on. So the U.S. government is trying to get the invasion of Syria back on track and make it look like somehow this is all Syria's fault for not jumping through enough hoops. Now, interestingly enough, this came out of Oregon Live. They're pulling out the stops regarding Syria. A guy by the name of David Ignatius is claiming a report from a brand new Syrian defector, meaning somebody inside Syria's government that they offered a huge amount of money to leave Syria, come to the United States of America, and basically say whatever they want him to say, claiming that President Bashar Assad's regime is using mobile biological weapons laboratories. And they're driving around the countryside making sarin and VX and Thousand Island dressing and who knows what all else. This is a replay of what we saw in Iraq. Remember, Colin Powell was out there saying we've got mobile biological weapons laboratories, and they showed us pictures of these trailers with all this piping on there. And they said, see, these make biological weapons. And it turned out they were artillery balloon inflators built and supplied by Great Britain to Saddam Hussein. So they knew what these devices were, but they just said, this looks impressive. There's a bunch of pipes on there. We'll show it to those dumb American people, and they'll believe it was a biological weapons lab, which, of course, didn't really work out. And so now they're recycling that propaganda hoax. Mobile biological weapons laboratories. They're trying to find some way to undermine this Russian deal. To say, we know Assad has weapons he's not declared. Meanwhile, we're continuing, despite the effort by the U.S. to try and blackmail Russia over the Chemical Weapons Convention taking place in The Hague. And I could have told you right up front, Russia was never going to go along with that. They dig their heels in the face of threats and blackmail. And Moscow has reiterated they will absolutely reject any UN resolution on Syria that includes the use of force. So there's going to be an impasse up there in the United Nations. We're going to take a break for some commercials, and we will be. Hello, America. Right. Welcome back to the show. Now, Washington appears to be throwing a bit of a tantrum because they were all set to go into Syria. We had our manufactured cause to go in and drop bombs, and Vladimir Putin just absolutely pulled a brilliant move together with Assad to come up with this chemical weapons deal, which now the U.S. is desperate to find some way to derail it and make it look like it's Syria's fault. And meanwhile, members of the U.S. government are basically throwing tantrums is what's going on here. And we've got this story where there is a group of U.S. senators who are out there lobbying for the freezing of Russian bank assets inside the United States of America because Russia is supporting Syria and Syria is doing all these horrible things, and it's basically throwing a tantrum. What will probably happen is that the Russian banks will start pulling out of the United States economy. And that's only going to accelerate the economic decline. Because I'm sure if Russia starts pulling out of the U.S. economy, probably a lot of other nations are going to do so as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in his speech to the General Assembly, is going to bring up the issue of continued U.S. drone strikes into Pakistan. Now, we are not technically in a state of war with Pakistan, but Obama continues to send drones into Pakistani territory targeting terror suspects. And I emphasize that word suspects because these people being targeted, their names are on a list very often for no other reason than somebody accepted the reward money to name a terrorist and said, yeah, this guy over here, I don't like him anyway, he's a terror suspect. And every one of these drone strikes are, along with the terror suspect who has not been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, takes out dozens of innocent bystanders. I think common sense is going to tell you when one country sends weapons into another country and starts killing civilians, that really does amount to an act of war. And Pakistan is going to make a big issue about this before the United Nations General Assembly, and I don't expect we'll see a lot of coverage in the American corporate media regarding this here. All right, I want to talk about the economy here because Max Kaiser had an interesting little commentary about how these top bankers, the 1%, the ultra-billionaires, trillionaires, who have gotten insanely rich off this Ponzi scheme central bank, suffering from a godlike complex. And he's got ample support for that idea. Remember when Lloyd Blankfein came out there at the height of the 2008 implosion of the mortgage-backed security fraud, and millions of Americans were losing their homes, and Blankfein said, well, we're doing God's work. And now we have this very interesting article. We linked it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it appeared in The Guardian. Now, the Guardian article is actually a critique, but apparently it's responding to an article by a banker, mathematician, who's in a top position of one of the world's most successful banks, who's basically going on and saying, really, the vast majority of bankers are decent, honorable people. We're really good. There's a few bad apples, but really you should not be angry or upset with bankers. And here's a direct quote from what he said. The vast majority of those working in financial services are decent, honorable people doing decent and honorable things. Finance weeds out the sphincters, idiots, charlatans, and fools pretty quickly. And that's the main reason I don't recognize the picture painted by many of the contributors to the blog. Maybe they are some of the ones who've been weeded out. In other words, he's saying there's a few bad apples, but the system corrects for them. No, it doesn't. Bernie Madoff showed that to us. Bernie Madoff did what he did for 12 long years while Harry Markopoulos was going up to the Securities Exchange Commission and saying, look, this guy's running a Ponzi scheme. And the Securities Exchange Commission looked the other way, and Bernie Madoff basically cheated his own investors to the tune of $65 billion. The system does not correct itself. Government is supposed to correct it, and in the case of the United States, it did not. So basically, my critique here is we have somebody who's at the top of the banking system, who profits from that banking system, trying to reassure us all that bankers as a class are a swell bunch of Joes. But what if the banking system itself is a fraud? Then it doesn't matter how good or evil the people who work for it are, does it? Private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest by design create more debt than money with which to pay that debt. That's the reason every nation on earth enslaved to that banking model is now drowning in artificially created debt. And remember, this is the model of banking the American Revolution was fought to free us from, only to have our corruptible and corrupted central government sell us back into that slavery not once but 3 separate times with the first and second banks of the United States and then with the Federal Reserve. And even as the predations of that Federal Reserve private central banking model edge this nation closer and closer to ultimate financial collapse, the U.S. is using its military might to force that same system of banker slavery onto the rest of the world. And so this banker who's out there saying, oh, you know, they're really good people. No, they're not. They know what they're doing. And they know how the system is rigged to simply loot the wealth of the people in its nation for the benefit of those private bankers. The public currency originally was set up in this nation to be a public utility. And it has been hijacked as a for-profit venture. The Federal Reserve does not exist to serve the country. It does not exist to serve the people. According to Alan Greenspan, it's not even answerable to federal government authority. It exists to make a profit on the labor of the people. And anybody who's connected with that system shares that guilt. And I'm sure the teller down at your bank there behind that little window really is rather clueless about what's going on. I'm sure as part of the indoctrination program to go to work for a bank, they show you all kinds of audiovisual programs about what a blessing banking is on the community and how civilization can't exist without private central banks. But of course we know civilization did exist for millennia without private central banks. Story over at 12160.info. The credit bubble is not only back, it is 94% bigger than it was in 2007. In other words, we're on the doorstep of another major implosion of credit, and it's going to be far worse than 2008. And we're going to keep going through these over and over and over again until somebody has the courage to stand up and say it is the economic system itself that is at fault. It's not the people. It's not the unwillingness to work. The system itself is unstable and must crash. It is a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid, and all pyramids crash. And that's what's going on right now. Not just in the United States of America, but all over the European Union. Every nation with the same model of banking is drowning in all this artificially created debt. And nobody has the courage to stand up and say, all right, this needs a rethink. We need to go back to the economic model the United States was started with. Government-issued currency that circulates through commerce without accruing interest to the private central bankers. Now, there's an interesting story over at nanex.net suggesting that last week, just ahead of the Federal Reserve announcement that they were going to continue quantitative easing because they really can't shut it off now, that information was leaked ahead of time to insiders because a surge of buy orders on the stock market arrived at those clearinghouse computers just seconds before the official announcement by the Federal Reserve. So somebody somewhere bought in when the market was down and rode that sudden surge up to the top following the Fed's announcement and then sold off and just made an instant overnight killing. Vast amounts of money they made by gaming the system for which nothing of real value was returned to the system. And by the way, Wall Street likes to think that every time they game the system and they create instant millions of dollars of profit, that it doesn't really harm anybody, but that's not true. Common sense has to tell you that money comes from somewhere. It comes from the stock value of the traded companies. It comes from the investors who were not on the inside and didn't get the advance information. It doesn't just appear out of thin air. Somebody is always hurt in these financial shenanigans. The model is by spreading the hurt over 330 million Americans that nobody will notice, except that looking around our homes and our towns and our cities, we see the hurt. It's piling up before us every single day. Finland has now joined the gold repatriation movement. They want their gold back from the depositories in London and New York and Paris. So it's beginning to accelerate. And we're coming up on the point where somebody's going to have to say, look, we're sorry, the gold isn't there anymore. We've got it on paper. Trust us, it's on paper. But we don't have it in the vaults. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones here. Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I have two quick comments. We're talking about turning our money supply into government-issued currency that's a utility rather than earning interest for private banks. I agree with that. Once we do that, what I would suggest is the new currency, since we're done with pyramid schemes, how about let's take the pyramid off the $1 bill? Let's get rid of that.
Well,
and then we also take the New World Order off of the $1 bill. We don't put anything in there that's not in English. We take all the Latin out of there, right? And basically, the $1 bill, instead of we take "In God We Trust" off of it, right? Because we're supposed to separate church and state. And I say, for any currency, for the president's faces on there, instead of just a pose, have them, money changing tables.
Well,
Like
I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement with. I'm in agreement with taking all the Latin off of there. And frankly, though, if we're looking at a crash of the current system, obviously the currency is going to come up for a complete redesign. And I would say let's go the route that Australia did with their polymer notes that have little coated windows in there, so the change machines are much more reliable. They've got edge notches so that people who are visually impaired can just feel what the denomination is. I'm in agreement with In God We Trust being taken off of there because it wasn't originally on the U.S. money. That was lobbied onto the coins and currency, after the fact. But again, that's all largely symbolic and image. It is the fundamental structure of the economy of the nation that has to be restored, and that is the public currency as a public utility. And the shape and form it takes is largely subordinate to that fundamental change. We have to get rid of private central banking. And we need leaders with the courage of an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy to get this nation's economy back into something that is serving the public interest and not the private bankers.
And there's absolutely no reason we should be paying private banks interest. And you know what?
No, there isn't.
The Federal Reserve says, we turn over all the excess profits back to the Treasury Department. But here's what they never said. They never admit to this. The real profit center for this whole game is the fact that they're setting the monetary policy. And they know ahead of time how much money is going to be put in circulation, what industries are going to get it. Mm-hmm. And it's that inside information that's worth all the money in the world. So even though these stockholders in the Federal Reserve can produce statements saying, we don't really get that much of a dividend and we don't get that much of a return on our investment, so you really shouldn't hate us so much because we turn over all the excess profits back to the government. No, the profit center is the inside information that they've been acting on for the last 100 years.
Well, let me back up one step here, because first of all, the Federal Reserve says they turn over the excess profit to the U.S. government, but that is generally supposed to be from the money they loan directly to the U.S. government. But it's always less than the accrued interest, and we don't know how much they're really turning over because the Federal Reserve refuses audits. What we do know is that all the money junkies connected with that system are fabulously wealthy. And obviously there is a flow of money from the American people into the pockets of the private banker. And you're absolutely right. If the U.S. government can print up a Treasury note for $1, why are they not printing up a dollar bill for that $1? And the difference is one serves the public interest, that paper dollar from the Treasury, and the other one serves the bankers. And that's really the only difference between our current system and the system the nation started with. The system the nation started with served the people and the nation, and the system we have now is all about reaping in profits for those bankers. Because every dollar on planet Earth began as a loan at interest from that private central bank. Whether it's dollars in circulation here in the United States of America or dollars flowing overseas as part of Bretton Woods or the petrodollar deal, they all begin as a loan from the Federal Reserve at interest. And that is where they're getting all their money. And anybody who believes they're turning over the entire excess profits to the U.S. Treasury, that's nonsense. The amount they're turning over to the U.S. Treasury is just a tiny, tiny pittance of what they're earning on that volume of dollars that's out there on planet Earth.
And it's that inside information that is destroying our global economy. Now, the other comment I had, just quickly, I'm so angry about these lies about Syria. I cannot tell you, Mike. I cannot tell you how angry I am about it. This sarin gas business, you're still on there saying that just because it was sarin gas that somehow automatically it's Assad's fault. Well, remember the Tokyo gas attacks back in 1995? That was carried out by an obscure Shinto terrorist group that lived up on Mount Fuji. That wasn't a state, and they had access to sarin gas. The sarin gas is not that hard to make or gain access to or deliver. Now, maybe 60 years ago, you needed to be a rocket scientist in order to operate and design, create a rocket. But you don't have to be one now. We've got people in Gaza that know how to launch rockets. We've also got Mossad in Gaza who knows how to launch rockets as well.
Well, I mean, we know the rebels in Syria had sarin. They were caught with it by the Turkish authorities. But you're absolutely right. The entire, you'll pardon the expression, logic from the U.S. government is sarin gas was used, therefore it had to be Assad. because we know that the rebels don't have sarin. When they've been caught with it, it's complete and utter nonsense. And again, going back to that original point, the official U.S. excuse for going to war in Syria is that on the day the UN chemical weapons inspectors arrived, Assad was stupid enough to gas his own Alawite supporters, women and children, and some of his own soldiers right in front of those inspectors. And it makes no sense, because what should be there in that story and isn't is a motive for Assad to do something that stupid.
And I'm with you, Mike, on this. When you hear something and it doesn't sound right, look for what's not there that should be there. And they keep trotting out this terrorism scare, but the very odd thing about the terrorism, especially this creation, this fiction called Al-Qaeda, for some reason in Al-Qaeda's whole history, it's never attacked Israel. Isn't that funny?
Yeah,
Isn't that funny
weird how that works out, huh?
Yeah. But now I'm wondering, because we're not going to war with Syria, I think it's too late for them now. They're going to launch a false flag either in Israel or the United States, and we're getting bombarded with terrorism news now from Kenya, from Pakistan.
It's the same thing that we saw in the months leading up to 9/11. It was just all terror all the time. It's this villain or that villain, and they're in a pre-sell mode. They're pre-selling terror. So when the big bang goes off, Americans will say, "Oh, it was a terrorist attack." And I don't think it's going to work, because at this point, I think when the big bang goes off, most Americans are going to say it's another 9/11. It's another Boston Marathon bombing. And for those Americans who do buy the official story, what they're going to be saying is this proves NSA spying doesn't work. It proves the Department of Homeland Security doesn't work. It proves TSA doesn't work. It proves FBI and CIA don't work. If we need to cut spending to balance the budget, let's start with those agencies, because they're not accomplishing what they're telling us they're supposed to be accomplishing.
My guess is about these scandals reaching the media is it's no accident. I think and this is just my guess, Mike, is that they're releasing this information about the NSA wiretapping and the IRS. I think they're trying to quiet any whistleblowers within the government. I think they're trying to scare the heck out of them, and especially the media. Say, hey, we have access to all your phone records, right? And they're saying it publicly.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that was a big reason some of this stuff was allowed out. But they didn't get the reaction they were expecting. Those reporters who were being spied on by the Department of Justice, instead of quieting down, they got outraged. The American people, when they found out they're being watched constantly by the NSA, they didn't get quiet and scared. They got seriously ticked off. And so somebody seriously misjudged how the public was going to react to these announcements.
Well, Mike, I think they were afraid of whistleblowers, high-up whistleblowers, saying, hey, 9/11 was an inside job. I think they mitigated their risk. They're like, hey, we're going to draw some fire by releasing this information to the American public, but it's better than having top government officials come out and say, hey, this is what we know about 9/11.
Hey, we don't need new whistleblowers. We know 9/11 was a false flag attack. And we were lied to. That's all we need to know about this government and focus on. We were lied to. The fine details do not matter. We'll be back after Phyllis Shapley and some... Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Art from Off the Grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. I'm sorry to be such a regular caller, but you make it so difficult for me to shut up. This Syria thing, it was interesting as I was watching the... conversations taking place at the UN, and I heard two very interesting comments. One was from Ban Ki-moon and the other one was from Obama, and they're like absolutely opposite to each other. And, Ban Ki-moon, he had such a novel idea that, he said he urged all other countries to stop aiding both sides of the, stop, you folks that are supporting Assad and supplying him with whatever, stop supplying him. You people supplying the rebels, stop supplying them. Everybody just get out. And I thought, what a novel idea. Let the Syrian people deal with that. Isn't that what Obama said, that it should be up to the Syrian people?
Yeah, but this was never up to the Syrian people. This was never a popular revolution. It's a bunch of hired mercenaries trying to carry out a coup d'etat, a covert coup d'etat masquerading as a popular revolution. It's the same thing they did in Libya, same thing they tried to do in Iran in 2009.
Right. But I thought, that's a great idea. Let's stop supplying each side. Let's everybody just stop and let them deal with it. But then Obama gets up there and he says that, meanwhile, and all this while he's, complaining about the national debt. We got to raise the debt ceiling because we got to pay our bills, even though we can't even pay the bills we already got. Well, that doesn't make me. And we got this bonehead Nimrod, wacko, bimbo, who I forget what's her name, Pelosi, coming out saying there's nothing left we can cut. We can't cut anything else. We can't cut anything else. But Obama goes to the UN and he stands there and he says, we're going to send another $640 million to the opposition against Assad.
Yeah,
wait a minute.
I mean, in Washington, D.C., when they talk about cuts, it's cuts to those things we, the American people, are willing to pay taxes for. They don't cut all this very costly stuff that we don't agree with, like the wars of conquest, the money to Israel, NSA spying, PRISM spying. All of this stuff they see as essential, and when they talk about cuts, it's always things like, food stamps, Social Security, all the things that we, the people, expect in return for our taxes. And so, it simply doesn't occur to people like Nancy Pelosi that maybe they should start cutting all of these things that the U.S. people don't agree with, like the spying and so forth. And Pelosi is now out there saying that we should be glad there's no such thing as a 40-hour work week because it enables us to proceed to fulfill our dreams. So basically they're saying, the new philosophy is work until they drop.
Well, to allow everybody to fulfill their dreams. What about the dreams of the man and the woman who are wanting to put food on the table and clothes on the back for their children? That's a hell of a dream to me, and they're making it impossible for anybody to fulfill the dream. I mean, hell, if you can't even put food on your table and good clothes on your back and have a nice roof over your head, then how can you afford
what Pelosi is actually talking about, of course, is the fact that employers across the country are going from full-time to part-time workers to evade Obamacare. And now she's out there trying to say, this is a good thing. You're only going to work 20 hours a week. Think of what you'll do with that other 20 hours, which sounds really good if during that 20 hours you are working, you're able to earn enough money to take care of yourself and your family, and you can. In fact, I want to insert a story that I saw here earlier where apparently some religious group, let me see if I can actually find this thing out here. It's further down on my list of talking about. Well, anyway, it was one of these basic Christian organizations coming out and saying that it's really in the ideals of Christianity to cut food stamps in order to encourage people to work and find self-dignity and self-fulfillment. And that's complete and utter nonsense, because the problem with this country isn't that people aren't willing to work, it's the fact that the jobs have gone away. They keep using this euphemism, the jobless recovery. Well, that's nonsense. There's no recovery until the American people have got jobs with which to pay these bills that are being dumped on them. And, jobless recovery is just another word for saying that the only recovery in the economy is on Wall Street because of that instant $85 billion a month being created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve to pour all over them to make it look like things are still working, and they're not. But for ordinary American people, there is no recovery. There has been no recovery. Our standard of living has been in decline for 30 years. Our wages and salaries have been in decline steady for the last 5 years. There is no recovery for the American people. And
now that you bring up that 80, every day being printed up, well, wait a minute. That just gets me thinking here. We have quantitative easing till infinity, which means they can run them every day, nonstop, no problem, print all the money you want. Why the hell do we need a national debt ceiling? If we can just print money from here until eternity, why do we need a debt ceiling? Let's just print it up.
Well, the problem is, of course, that creates inflationary pressure on the dollar and drives prices up for ordinary Americans. I mean, when they run those printing presses, they're stealing real value and purchasing power from your pocket and putting it in the pockets of the Wall Street bankers. Now, the reason we haven't seen as much inflationary pressure from all that money creation as we might expect is because these Wall Street bankers are just taking all that instantly created money and they're putting it in their own pockets. And that's why we're seeing that top 1%, their wealth is just going right through the roof. They're actually using the 1% as a cash sink, to bury that money. They balance the books and then they put it in their own pockets, call themselves very clever. But at some point, that money is going to start exploding back out into the community, and it's going to drive prices for everything right through the roof. And so runaway printing doesn't work. Just ask the people of Zimbabwe. And what's going on here is the system is dying on the vine, and that's why they're so desperate to get a world war going so they can blame the economic hardship on the war. And they've done it twice before. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, oh, we got to invade Syria. We've got to invade Iran. We've got to go to war against Russia and China. And in the long run, do you ever stop to realize that before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we're on the doorstep of big mistake number 3?
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, you see what I'm saying here. I'm just showing the absurdity of this. I mean, this is how outrageous this whole madness has gotten. I mean, it's not like I actually thought it was a good idea, but you see what I'm saying. I'm just basically getting at this whole thing. This is, man, if you or I ever tried anything like this, they would hang. It would be a public hanging.
Of course, for anybody but a private central banker, this is called counterfeiting.
Yeah, it's just insane. Hey, thanks, Mike. Keep up the good work, man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, interesting story coming out of Global Research up in Canada. There is a lawsuit that has been filed in the city of Detroit alleging that the city's mayor and his emergency manager colluded with the banks to put Detroit into bankruptcy in order to allow the money junkies to privatize the entire city. And it's kind of eerie because if you go back to the movie RoboCop 2, which takes place in Detroit, and I understand they're doing a remake right now, there's this wonderful little scene where the top money junkie in this giant corporation is saying, we're taking Detroit private. And here it is in the real world. And they're basically, this lawsuit is alleging that that's what the bankers and money junkies deliberately set out to do. Crash Detroit's economy so they could go in and buy up all the public assets at pennies on the dollar, turn around and start renting them back to the people whose taxes actually paid for them in the first place. That's what privatization means. It's not a good thing for the nation and its people. It's taking our public assets and turning them into privately for-profit operated systems. And some of the abuses of these things are just amazing. Like when they take over a highway that our taxes bought and paid for, and our gasoline taxes are supposed to maintain, and they sell it to a corporation, and the corporation puts up toll booths. That's privatization. Look what happened with the privatization of prisons, where we have all these judges who've been busted for deliberately sending people to jail to keep that mandated population of prisoners in there. Privatization was an absolute disaster. It was a betrayal of the American people. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the global banking disaster, meltdown. I linked to an article in a Dutch journal with a translation basically saying we're flying blind in the next crisis. And the observation this guy made is really very telling. He says, I'm growing ever more pessimistic and anxious. This is going very wrong. The banks are much too big. Short-term thinking reigns, oversight is insufficient, and the financial sector has the politicians in their back pockets, which sounds exactly like what's going on here in the United States of America. Nobody is maintaining an overview of what is best for the nation. The bankers are looking out for themselves. The politicians are doing whatever their campaign donors tell them to do. They're serving their own agenda. Nobody is maintaining an overview of what is best for the nation. That should be the job of the President of the United States of America. Harry Truman described the job of President as throwing cold water on foolishness. And he was absolutely right. That's the President's job. That's why he's got that veto. So that anybody who bribes enough members of Congress to get nonsense passed through into law, the President can look at it and say, this isn't going to work, and exercise the veto. And that system has clearly broken down. And it is necessary for there always to be, if you're going to have a central government authority, its top job is to basically maintain the overview, what is best for the people and the nation over the long view. And that has completely gone away. Everybody's thinking solely in terms of the next quarterly stockholders meeting, the next election, the next campaign, and hey, whatever's going to happen 10, 20 years from now, that's somebody else's problem. We don't have to worry about it. We saw that attitude with the creators of the Federal Reserve. They knew they were setting up a pyramid scheme that had to eventually collapse. But, hey, by the time that happens, they're all going to be dead and gone after lives of unearned luxury, wealth, and privilege and power. And that is really the heart of the problem of what went wrong with what used to be the greatest nation on earth. Little story, very charming. And, of course, I tuned into this because, as you know, my wife and I are involved in a couple of food programs here on the island of Oahu. This is a story out of USA Today where down in Georgia there was this couple that was going to get married, and for whatever reason they decided to call it off, and it was too late to get their deposits back. So they went ahead and had a gathering with the catering that was originally planned for the wedding, and they invited the homeless to come on in and eat the food and just have a get-together and have at least one day's respite from their lives of desperation out on the streets. And now they're thinking they're going to try and get this to be an annual event. And, of course, once a year isn't really going to solve the problem, but I think any time somebody is able to creatively take a situation that isn't working out and turn it to the advantage of helping their community, I think we have to applaud these people. Because it's very clear at this point the government isn't interested in feeding the American hungry or helping the American homeless. From the point of view of the government and the bankers, those people are useless. They can't borrow money. They can't pay it back. We don't care about them. And more, I mean, I got a flood of emails the other day when I was talking about the people who show up at these food programs, and I got all these emails saying, oh, I saw a person with a food stamp card getting steak and champagne and the rest of it. I've never seen that. And while I concede that there are probably some people out there trying to game the system, I am coming to the conclusion that all these claims of seeing people with food stamp cards, you know, loading up their shopping carts with steak and champagne and everything, I think that's part of the propaganda from the money junkies who just basically are just gathering it all into themselves, and they don't want to spend any money helping the poor and homeless in this country because they don't want to accept responsibility that their fiscal policies created this mess. It's a classic blame the victim mindset. Oh, they deserve to be hungry and homeless. You know, they're no good. They're all druggies. They're lazy. Really, they should go out and get jobs. There are no jobs out there. The mess that this country is in comes from those private central bankers, because when this nation did not have private central banking, it was prosperous. There was enough money floating through the economy for everybody to have jobs and for everybody to be doing well. But this private central banking scam is designed to rake in all the wealth of the nation into one tall, stinking pile over Wall Street and Washington, D.C. There isn't enough currency out here to support commerce. I mean, they're willing to loan you more, but the aggregate debt is what's destroying this country. This is why ancient Rome had the Jubilee. When the practice of usury piled the debt up so great it was starting to choke the empire, they would have a Jubilee, which was a year in which all debts were simply written off to restart the system. And when they stopped having Jubilee is when Rome started to fall. Now, meanwhile, another reminder of the decline of the United States of America, and I've been commenting about this for quite some time. We have all these Motion Picture Association of America and Recording Industry Association of America saying, oh, it's the pirates are the reason for our decline. And I keep saying the quality of the productions being put out by the American music and film and TV industries are very much in decline, because they're cutting budgets like crazy, and cable TV is just rerunning things constantly. You know, last night on cable was like the 87th showing of The Born Tedium. Now, over in China, their richest man is getting ready to build a new motion picture studio, which will be the largest studio in the world. Apparently, they had a launch for the plan, and they got Nicole Kidman and Leonardo DiCaprio and Catherine Zeta-Jones showing up for this launch. But this complex is going to have 20 studios, and they're planning a workload of 100 films a year, including 30 foreign productions. And it's just another example of how the United States just got used to living off of everybody else's wealth around the world, and we've allowed our manufacturing to decline, our agriculture has been destroyed by GMOs, and now our entertainment industry, which was the main propaganda device to promote the American view of life to the rest of the world, is crumbling. I mean, most film production is already out of the United States of America. Hollywood is, the only reason to be in Hollywood is if you think being in Hollywood is your life's ambition. But the best visual effects are coming out of New Zealand. You know, good TV productions coming out of BBC America. We're definitely hooked on BBC America. They've got some really good, thoughtful shows there. Some good writing going on there. Now, there are exceptions. I have to tip my hat to Aaron Sorkin over at HBO's The Newsroom as being really good writing. But that is like, you know, the isolated oddity in an otherwise very drab American film output. So China is now going to build a motion picture studio that will rival Universal or the Burbank Studios. I wonder if they need a visual effects expert to set up their production workflow over there. Now, getting on to the gun grabbers, because they're getting really weird, apparently down in Virginia Beach, there were 2 students who were playing with the airsoft guns. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, airsoft are these pellet guns that are harmless. They're made to look like real weapons, and kids like to buy and play with them. And contrary to propaganda that was put out by the Customs Department, which confiscated a shipment of the airsoft guns under the claim that they can be converted to fire real bullets, which nobody could actually do, they're harmless. They're toys. They're toy guns. They look very realistic, but they're toy guns. And apparently these 2 students were put on extended long-term suspensions. They weren't subject to expulsion, but long-term suspension. So the parents of one of the boys has already said, I'm taking my kid out of the school and I'm going to homeschool. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the show. And Senator Ted Cruz is now on the floor of the Senate doing what he's calling a non-filibuster filibuster of the House bill to grant emergency funding to the federal government to keep it working after the 1st of next month, but also to defund Obamacare. So Ted Cruz is up there saying, well, he's just going to rant and rave and talk. And we all know how this is going to end. They're going to get down to the wire, they're going to work through the weekend, and in the end they're going to pass the spending bill, and they're going to leave Obamacare alone. Because, gosh darn it, we don't want to offend those health insurance companies going into an election year cycle. You know, to heck with what the people want. To heck with the fact that Obamacare is going to add $7,000 a year to an average family's medical costs. Forget the fact that the computer system set up to collect your medical records and determine what benefits you can be given is hopelessly flawed. Obama is listening to his ego on this. I say Obamacare will be the law of the land, and by golly, I don't care how flawed it is, we'll put it out there. He's starting to sound like he works for Microsoft, that puts out every new release of Windows with 5,000 known bugs. The users will find them for us. Now then, getting back to the gun rights, actually the education and this school, we've seen these schools completely overreacting to guns, and it appears to be part of this Common Core agenda, because even the corporate media took notice of the fact that this textbook completely rewrote and changed the meaning of the Second Amendment. That they're teaching kids that you can keep and bear arms as long as you're part of a state militia. That's not what the Second Amendment says. It grants an individual right to the American citizens to keep and bear arms. Under U.S. law, the militia consists of 2 parts. There's the organized militia, which is the National Guard, and there is a recognized unorganized militia, which are all able-bodied Americans, meaning you and I. And the United States Supreme Court already ruled in the Heller decision. The Second Amendment, like every other amendment, conveys an individual right, not a collective right. And so Common Core appears to be little more than a Soviet-style brainwashing campaign directed against our children. And they know we're on to them. Now, the good news is, we were all covering this story where parents stood up to challenge a school board about Common Core. And were told point blank, you can't ask questions. We're the school board. We'll decide what your child is going to know. And you, the parent, have nothing to say about it. One of the parents pushed the issue, and he wound up being arrested. The good news is the prosecutors dropped all charges and said, really, this is nonsense. And I think most parents are going to be getting very, very upset at this idea that the state schools control what the child will know, and the parents have nothing to say about it. And that's nothing new with this government. If you go all the way back and you study the early history of the Black Panther movement, before they got infiltrated, before they went militant, before they got demonized, the original agenda of the Black Panther movement was guaranteed breakfasts for ghetto children, and that's something Claire and I could certainly support. And they wanted local control of the school curriculum. Now, when this nation started, all school curriculum was set by the local community because that local community knew best what those children needed to be studying in order to grow up and be a part of that community. We got to teach them farming. We got to teach them blacksmithing. We got to teach them how to repair, the farm equipment. We got to teach them, all this stuff that is part of our ongoing economy and development. And over time, and especially going back to Andrew Carnegie's educational foundation, the federal government has wanted to take control of the school curriculum in order to basically create generations of obedient, pliant servants. Andrew Carnegie and his foundation actually set as a policy for national education that children should be taught no more than they need to operate the machines in the factories and fill out the government paperwork, and we shouldn't muddy up their head with anything else like logic and critical thinking and reading the classics. And as you probably know from listening to the Phyllis Schlafly commentary, most of the mandatory reading requirements for Common Cause are government-issued pamphlets. So the good news is that the charges were dropped against that man who was arrested for daring to stand up to the school board and say, I am the parent of this child and I have something to say about this kid's education. And I think if you have the means to do it, put your child into a private school or take your child out of school and homeschool. And I know more and more states are passing laws to make it difficult for parents to homeschool their kids. But there's a war on for the minds of your children, the next generation. At the very least, take time. When your kid comes home from school, sit down with them while they're doing their homework and talk over what they're being taught. And just tell your kid, look, go to school and tell the teacher what the teacher wants to hear you say, but understand that school is not there to give you an education. They're there to make you think what the government wants you to think. Because very clearly that's the new model of education in the United States of America. Now, getting on to the gun grabbers, following on with the school's overreaction to anything that looks like a gun as part of the brainwashing of, when you see a gun, you should wet yourself. You never want to touch a gun. Guns are evil. Guns are bad. There was a gentleman up in the city of Somers, New York, who's pro-Second Amendment, and he was putting up pro-Second Amendment signs on his own private property. And they kept disappearing. And so he put up one of those wildlife cameras that you can buy now. You strap it to a tree, and anything moves in front of it, it takes a picture. And he discovered a police officer was just pulling up the black and white unit, getting out, tearing up the signs, throwing them in the trunk, and driving off. Now, I think they ought to arrest that police officer for trespassing, for willful destruction of private property, and certainly for violating the First and Second Amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America. I think even the Fourth Amendment comes into play there, because that officer has no grounds to walk onto that private property unless he is assured there's a crime going on there, and that sign was not a crime. Now, the question we need to ask is, was this officer just acting on his own? Was he addled on SSRIs? Or is that police department enforcing a policy of tearing down pro-Second Amendment signs wherever they see them? And so if any of you out there listening to this show, if you've had pro-Second Amendment signs on your property that disappear mysteriously, I want to hear about it. Because this is a completely inappropriate use of taxpayer-funded police resources to go out and basically tear down citizens' First Amendment rights to express their opinion on an issue. Okay, apparently that new NSA data center in Utah is now firing up. They have a $1.2 billion price tag on this Utah data center. How many servers they have and what they're doing and what the capacity is still classified. But the complex requires 65 megawatts of electricity, enough to power a city of 65,000 homes. And, of course, it takes about 1.5 million gallons of cooling water a day. Wow, look at all that global warming coming out of these data centers. Where's Al Gore when we need him? And, again, all of this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. If they want to talk about cutting spending to balance the federal budget, let's start with the NSA. Let's start with all those government agencies that are in violation of the Constitution of the United States of America. Because they are not serving the American people. And I want to keep hitting the point as we show our concern about a potential false flag attack in the United States to reignite the war fever. If there is another major terror attack in the United States of America, it will tell us all the NSA failed. PRISM failed. Department of Homeland Security failed. TSA failed. They don't work. Let's stop wasting taxpayer money on these boondoggles. Meanwhile, back up at the UN, Brazil's president, Dilma Rousseff, is basically out there saying the United States should not be spying on other countries. They're meddling in other countries, which I'm sure Obama's going to say, well, that's what we do. We're exceptional. We're supposed to meddle in the rest of the world. It's our manifest destiny. And there's a huge backlash from the rest of the world, and even from the United Nations itself, because the U.S. got caught tapping into, hacking into, and spying on the UN's secure telecommunications facilities. And that's why the UN isn't going to be very sympathetic to U.S. designs on Syria and Iran. European Union is out there saying they're not at all satisfied with explanations about U.S. spying on their financial centers, which has got nothing to do with terrorism. It's all about gaming the system. We'll be back after these. America, welcome back to the show here. And Ben Swan has a new report out. We just linked it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And he's raising an area of concern we should all be thinking about. Part of this whole Obamacare program is the Federal Data Hub, which is another name for this $88 million software package that keeps all your medical records and is supposed to calculate what benefits you are eligible to receive and what you should be paying and all this other centralized control. And, of course, it includes within it all of your private medical records, which are no longer private. That's one of the implications of this database, is that when you go to your doctor and you share a very embarrassing private fact about your life for medical purposes, that information can be sold off to marketing companies, pharmaceutical companies. It's just out there made public. And what Ben Swan is pointing out, these so-called Obamacare navigators who are sitting on those keyboards with access to all of your private medical information aren't being given any kind of a background check to determine if they should be trusted with your private medical information. Which means, let me give you a hypothetical. Somebody who's a blackmailer gets one of his associates to get a job as an Obamacare navigator and starts pouring through the files looking for embarrassing illnesses that could be used to blackmail a politician or just anybody with sufficient money. Send me XYZ dollars or I'm going to make it public you had an abortion back there when you were screaming about marital fidelity and so forth. It's wide open. The United States of America, the United States government has declared open season on all of your private personal information, and all of it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And more importantly, this government has demonstrated time and time again they cannot and should not be trusted with your personal information. Now, the biggest argument I have against this centralized computer database of all of our medical records is that once those records are off of paper and onto the computer, they can be changed. And we already know that every year in this country, 400,000 Americans are killed by medical mistakes. In fact, CDC just came out with a report that prescription painkillers are killing more Americans than cocaine and heroin put together. And because of the threat of lawsuits, hospitals and doctors are well motivated to go back and try and alter records to conceal their mistakes. And with a paper record, it's very difficult to do. With computer records, it's instantaneous. And that's another reason why we should be opposing Obamacare and doing everything we can to be out of it. Going to take a phone call here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to go back to what you were talking about, the education, and finish up with a thought about the medical tyranny that we're going under. Our school system, our education system, is conditioning, indoctrination, and training for meaningless manual factory labor, which now is out of date. There's a major emphasis on being on time. Why is it so important to be on time? Well, it's because when you're in a job, at a factory, they want you there when that whistle blows. There's also the idea that you take your cues and you take everything that is told to you by an authoritative figure, whether it's a boss, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach. That person tells you what is and what isn't. And his law or his belief on what he says is almost more important than fact when you're in school, because that's what he wants on his test.
Yeah, that's the reason. That's the reason for the school bells. Get you used to answering bells to lead you around from job to job. We've actually got a school down here at the bottom of the hill that actually plays military bugle calls for their start of class and end of class here. I mean, I can hear them coming up the hill every day.
I mean, that's a perfect example right there. Furthermore, there used to be in the 1800s and the 1700s, there was something called a classical education, where you didn't learn dates and people and events. You did, but you learned the repercussions and the reasons and
yes,
the thought behind those and how they applied. And there was a focus on things like music and art and great literature and meaning and things that could be applied. Nothing that is taught in school today is ever applied. It's simply memorization and repetition. There is never an understanding about how does this, and that's why kids hate school.
No, you're absolutely right. When I was a teacher, I saw that myself. Recently I was a teacher over at the University of Hawaii, but many years ago, I actually did a year of teaching remedial math at the high school level in Southern California, and I noticed even then, history was being taught as these isolated little bumps that you would memorize. Name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and you'd walk out of the history class thinking you knew history because you could remember 1492 and Columbus and coming over to the United States. But what they weren't teaching was the cause and effect, because history is not just these isolated incidents. It is the cause and effect, this constant intertwined dance. And by training kids to think of history without the cause and effect, they're blinding the kids to seeing cause and effect in current events.
Absolutely, and there's no understanding that our history is why we are where we are today, and then there's no understanding that it's okay. The Revolutionary War, the English were the bad guys, and the Americans, the colonies, were the good guys, and things are not that black and white. Things are not that simple. I mean, and that deeper understanding is not taught in schools. Simply meant to condition. No,
you're absolutely right. The American Revolution was fought primarily over King George III's Currency Act. You can confirm that going back and reading the writings of Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. But in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, all of a sudden the public schools stopped teaching children about the Currency Act and about the abuses of the Bank of England, and they sort of rebranded the American Revolution into tea taxes and Stamp Act and the rest of it. And so this idea of using the schools to brainwash the children, it is nothing new. When I was going to grade school, we got the dose of propaganda regarding the Soviet Union and those gosh darn commies. And I realized looking back that was just as onerous and just as much mind control as the schools now today trying to rewrite the Second Amendment.
And it's why we are better than the communists. Because we have capitalism and we have freedom, it's all brainwashing. Now, I want to jump on to the medical tyranny that we're going under. I had a family member who had severe back problems, herniated discs, the whole nine. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor pretty much said, listen, we're going to give you a whole bunch of pain medication for a very long time. The doctor, he said that the longest time he was in the doctor's office, meeting with the doctor over the course of 9 months, if you added up the entire time the doctor spent with him, it was less than 20 minutes over those 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, furthermore, So 9 months, he decides, listen, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going through the pain medication anymore. I'm seeking alternative health. His back gets better. Now, of course, after being on 9 months of pain medication, he has trouble getting off it. He goes to another doctor. He was referred to by this doctor to help him get off of his medication. So he goes to that doctor, and he could get married, he needs to get his life insurance, new house, new wife, the whole nine. The life insurance turned him down, not because of the fact that he was addicted to the pain medication, but because of the medication that he took to get off of the pain medication. And everything that he had done, all the orders that he had followed, came explicitly from his doctor. He did everything by the book. He did everything correctly, and he still got the shaft in the end.
Well, one of the things that concerns me about the potential abuses of Obamacare, we know that these prescription antidepressants are very, very dangerous for a significant portion of the people who are taking them. And what happens when you're seeing your doctor and he says, well, I think you're a little too stressed out. I'm going to write you a prescription for this SSRI. If you refuse that prescription, does Obamacare say, well, you're not following our guidelines, therefore your benefits are cut off?
The repercussions, we do understand the full repercussions of Obamacare.
No, we don't. It's still changing. It's still changing. We're a week away from its being implemented. It's still changing. Got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be right America, back. Welcome back to the show here. And to clarify on Ted Cruz and his non-filibuster filibuster, what he is opposing is the Senate version of the emergency spending bill that leaves Obamacare alone. So Ted Cruz is taking a stand against Obamacare, and the corporate media is already bringing out the big guns to verbally chastise him. Sarah Palin is currently on the Fox channel just going on and on about why he's just completely wrong, about whatever. I don't know. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel when they're getting Caribou Barbie out of cold storage to go after this. But again, just stepping back here, and realizing what's going on here, we have this government program that all of the American people are opposed to. It's not able to be implemented right now because the software that runs it is just full of flaws, and the people who are building that software are saying it's not ready to go. And we have a president whose ego is saying, no, you will do it now, you will do it now. And, of course, behind him are all those health insurance companies that are just going to make a bloody fortune off of all of this, because we saw this back when auto insurance was made mandatory. I'm old enough to remember when automobile insurance was an optional thing, and the auto insurance companies had to really work to get you to buy an auto insurance policy, and they had to have low premiums and good service, and they had to take care of you to attract you into having an auto insurance policy, which for most people, they thought it was a good idea anyway, but there was a lot of competition keeping costs down and keeping service up. And then, of course, once auto insurance was mandatory for everybody, the premiums went right through the roof, and the quality of service just evaporated, and we're going to see exactly the same thing with Obamacare. And they're already acknowledging, yeah, this is going to increase health care costs for the average American family by $7,000 a year. And it will not increase the quality of your medical care one tiny bit. In fact, I would argue that because of all the additional staff that are being hired to process all the Obamacare paperwork, the possibility for errors is going to increase the likelihood that somebody somewhere will make a mistake that will end your life. We have the most expensive medical care on earth, and it's something like 30th in quality. There's something wrong there. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan the Man is now in our control room ready to grab the phone when you call on in with your commentary there. We talked about this before, but I'm going to mention it again because now apparently the European media has picked up on this, and we're seeing over in BBC where they're carrying the story where RSA, which is a well-known internet security firm, cryptographic expert, has now advised its customers to avoid using a particular encryption algorithm out of concerns that it has in fact been backdoored by the National Security Agency. And they're basically saying there is this algorithm for generating random numbers that has long been suspect because it's computationally very heavy compared to other random number generators. And researchers have said if you have a certain set of key values, it opens up and allows the NSA to read your messages. And RSA is strongly recommending switching to other random number generators instead. And the particular system is called dual elliptical curve deterministic random bit generation, and I've been hearing warnings about that all along. And remember, the NSA has a long history of backdooring the standard encryption systems. When DES came out, first of all, they mandated a limit to the key length, which got everybody worried about that. Making it very obvious they wanted to be able to brute force the keys with a minimum of effort. Then it came out there was actually something inside the DES headers called the work reduction packet, which was your encryption key re-encrypted with a key only the NSA had, so they could just grab that packet, decode it, and they had your encryption key right there. Didn't even have to brute force the key. Then when they were trying to foist Clipper chip on us, they had the law enforcement assistance field, which again was your encryption key encrypted with a key that only the NSA had to make it just automatic. They could read your traffic. And the problem is, it is the government we should be most concerned about reading our private messages because of incidents we've seen, like up at the Seattle Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, where U.S. government intelligence agencies paid with your tax dollars were stealing business secrets from conference attendees. It's got nothing to do with crime prevention, has nothing to do with controlling terror, was all about looting business secrets from conference attendees, including Americans. If you are developing a new product or a new service, you must take steps to protect yourself from these government snoops who will steal your business idea and profit from it. They've been caught doing it time and time again. I've lost count of the number of government intelligence agencies who've been caught carrying out insider stock trades on the basis of information they steal from ordinary citizens, ordinary businessmen. This government cannot and should not be trusted with your private information. Now, the good news is we proved with our 3 NSA challenges that if you take the time to develop your own codes and encryptions, the NSA is going to not be able to read your traffic. Far from the image of brilliant cryptographers that we see in TV and movies, the NSA is able to break coded messages because they're all backdoored. And if you develop your own methodology, you can foil them. Certainly for a limited time scale to carry out some kind of an operation. And that proves this NSA spying really isn't about criminals and terrorists. It's about keeping an eye on you, the American people. By the way, over in Great Britain, Stephen Fry has now joined the hue and cry demanding an end to NSA and GCHQ mass surveillance on the people. And I have to applaud the man. He's showing a tremendous amount of courage because I know from personal experience, when you stand up to the government, your career in the film and TV industry can evaporate. And it's rather ironic that Stephen Fry is risking becoming a real-life version of the character he played in V for Vendetta, popular TV star who gets crushed by the government for not behaving. So he's showing a huge amount of courage, and don't you ever forget that about him. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Jim in Georgia, aloha, what's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. My niece had come over to my house, and I'm going to tell you what's going on with her. She's working for a convenience store. The man owns 5 stores, and I went up to talk to him. I didn't do her any good because she's afraid she's going to lose her job. She was working full-time. They cut her back to part-time, and what she's doing now is working 30 hours on the clock, 10-hour days, and then 20 hours off the clock. And what he's doing, he's paying her $7.50 an hour. Let me look at this now. He's paying her $7.50 an hour and $7.50 an hour off the clock. But what he's doing is he's charging her tax on her income for the 50 hours, even though 20 of them are off the clock. And she has no benefits, no insurance or anything, not paying her overtime. And she told me not to rock the boat. You know, she said I need the job. She's got 2 kids, and I wonder how they can do that. Charge federal and all those other taxes out of her check, which are 20 hours off the clock, which is well.
I think the obvious answer is he's not turning that money over to the government, because if he reports that income and those hours, then they're going to know she's a full-time worker. So I think he's just ripping her off. And we're seeing that all across the country right now. People are so desperate for jobs that unscrupulous employers feel they can get away with anything. And, it really is a horrible situation. We saw the same abuses back during the Great Depression of the 1930s, where, corporations and business owners just got openly abusive of employees because they figured they could get away with it. We got to take a break.
It's a shame. I tried to talk to the man, but I can hardly understand her. They don't speak English.
We got to take a break for commercials, Jim. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. And a listener just sent me in this story called "One Man's Obamacare Nightmare," and was actually being carried by Fox News. So I'm going to have to tip the hat at them and take back some of the bad things I've been saying about them. And it's basically a story about Andy and Amy Mangione of Louisville, Kentucky, family of 4. They do have health insurance that they bought on the individual market, and they just got a letter in the mail notifying them that their health insurance premiums are going to triple next year, from $333 a month to $965 a month. And the letter said the increase was in order to be compliant with the new health care law. So even those of you who've got health insurance and you think Obamacare is not going to affect you, of course it is. Your health insurance company can raise your premiums. This was just a blatant giveaway to the health insurance corporations, the money junkies. Just amazing. Apparently, Benjamin Netanyahu has issued instructions to the Israeli delegation to the United Nations that they are to stage a walkout when the president of Iran comes up for his turn at the podium to express Israel's displeasure with... Well, I don't even care what Israel's displeased with, because they're always displeased with something. There is no making Israel happy. Let's quit trying. But I think Netanyahu may be misreading what the world's reaction to the walkout is going to be. I'm sure Netanyahu is thinking, oh, Israel doesn't want to listen to this man, therefore we should not listen too. But I think most of the rest of the world is going to look at this very childish behavior as what it is. Netanyahu throwing another tantrum because he can't get his war with Iran. Now, I certainly hope the U.S. delegation refuses an order to walk out, but I wouldn't bet money on it. It's just all theatrics. They want that war. They want their war, and they'll do anything to get it. Now, getting back to the NSA, and it was almost inevitable, there is another ransomware making the rounds on the Internet, which apparently is attempting to pose as being from the NSA and PRISM. You are engaging in illegal activity. There's a fine of however much it is that you must send in through an instant payment system, at which point your computer will be unlocked. This malware, at least I don't think, comes from the NSA. But it is a reminder that for all the surveillance on the computers, PRISM, NSA, whatever, they can't seem to find the cyber criminals. They can't find the people writing viruses. They can't find the people who are pouring Viagra ads into your email box. They can't find any of those. And if they can't find cyber criminals, then they don't stand a snowball's chance in the dark region of finding a real, genuine terrorist. And it's another reminder that all these billions of dollars have been spent on these NSA data centers that don't actually accomplish anything. They're there to wave at the American people to say, we are watching everything that you do, which I'm sure is great for all the exhibitionists. They don't have to get on the subway anymore. They just stand up in front of their webcam and go, waha, NSA. But for all the surveillance on our computer systems, for them to be unable to catch any of these hackers and malware writers, if this NSA system worked the way it's advertised to work, if PRISM worked the way it was advertised to work, they would have found the creators of Stuxnet and Dooku and Gauss and all these other malwares. Or they'd find the guys putting out the ransomware, posing as the FBI and the NSA. It's certainly bad for the NSA's image for this ransomware to be making the rounds, but NSA can't find them. Golly gee shuckies. Looks like a total, complete failure from where I'm sitting. Now, getting back to Obamacare, apparently there is a growing movement among general practitioners to boycott this National Health Service database over concerns that it is forcing them to send confidential patient records to private companies who have no accountability what they do with that private information. And so more and more doctors are saying they don't want to have anything to do with this thing, because doctors understand they are entrusted with very personal information by their patients. This is information that is completely unrelated to crime or terror or anything else, and for that reason it should stay private. Some of it might be potentially embarrassing, and the government has no right under the Fourth Amendment to have access to any of that information. And doctors are being forced to basically take information on their patients' most personal medical issues and send it into this giant database being operated by these navigators who, according to Ben Swan, don't even go through a background check. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the CDC has come out with a new report that says that painkillers, prescription medications prescribed by doctors, are killing 4 times as many Americans as cocaine and heroin combined. It's another reminder that the medical establishment in this country is a major cause of death by doctor, death by wrong prescription. When I was much younger, one of my favorite cartoonists was a guy named Gahan Wilson, and he had a couple of books out, and he did cartoons for Playboy magazine. And one of my all-time favorites was this pharmacist at a prescription counter looking at a bottle and saying, "Whoa, Mr. Smithers, we did goof on your prescription." And on the floor in front of the counter is this gelatinous blob with a couple of eyeballs and a hat on it. And it's funny when it's a Gahan Wilson cartoon, but as we find out, 400,000 Americans every year are killed by medical mistake, and another 4 to 8 million suffer permanent, long-lasting harm from the abuses of this medical industrial complex. Another story here. Apparently, U.S. doctors have been caught ordering needless MRIs for patients because they're getting financial kickbacks. Going to take a phone call here. Johnny in New York. Aloha, Johnny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brother Mike. Long time no speak. But, yeah, you were talking about, forget about Israel, I like what Truman said. He said, listen, when Jesus Christ was on the earth, he couldn't satisfy the Jews. How the hell am I going to be able to satisfy these people?
That sounds like Harry Truman.
But, Michael, it's so true. You're never going to please these SOBs. Well, Israel, hell, let's call it that. I just get really quick to the gun control. Guns don't kill people, Michael. Gun control kills people.
Yes.
The gun control laws and the gun-free zones are supposed to protect people from gun violence. And if somebody listens to the mainstream media like Piers Morgan and Joe Scarborough, that's what we're led to believe. But in reality, the opposite is true. Gun-free zones are actually free killing zones. And in truth, guns don't kill people. The gun control laws kill people, Michael.
Well, have you ever noticed it's kind of funny, when there's a mass bombing, they'll blame the bomber, but when there's a mass shooting, they blame the guns. Chicago has been held up as the model for gun control in the United States, and yet they've got an incredible epidemic of gun violence going on there because the criminals have the guns and the law-abiding citizens do not. Washington, D.C., some of the most restrictive gun laws in the nation, and after dark, you do not want to be on the streets of Washington, D.C., because it looks really pretty and touristy during the daytime, but at night it's just a shooting zone. And inevitably, there has never been an example of a gun ban imposed on the people that lowered crime and gun violence. When Great Britain did their gun ban, crime went through the roof, Great Britain kept their gun ban on the excuse that even though the British people were actually at greater risk of gun violence, they believed they were safer, and therefore that was their justification for keeping their gun ban. But it's absolutely true. The government wants to disarm you because they realize you're getting seriously ticked off, and they don't know how to deal with that. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right America, back. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about how Netanyahu has ordered the Israeli delegation to storm out of the General Assembly when Iran's president speak. And apparently over at Gawker.com, they've busted some of Israel's supporters for creating a fake LinkedIn profile for the Iranian president, with which to make it appear that he is, doing whatever it is that Israel says he's doing that justifies being bombed by the United States here. Now, earlier we were talking about the banker's godlike complex. We were talking about how Lloyd Blankfein said that he was doing God's work as he took away homes from millions and millions of Americans. And now we're getting this very bizarre story. This is from AIG's CEO, Robert Benmosh. And he was in a Wall Street interview over the last weekend in which he tried to equate the growing public anger against the banking establishment with the lynching of blacks in the South. Now, talk about a bit of a reach, and I don't see any linkage between one and the other. But that is what they're going to try and reassure themselves that they're the good people and that we, the people of the United States of America, who have spent a lifetime of toil only to see the proceeds of that toil stripped off by a gamed banking system, they want to see us as the bad guys. It's amazing. Meanwhile, we're getting word that the United States Supreme Court, when it convenes next month, may be poised to strike down one of the few remaining campaign finance laws limiting campaign donations by the ultra-wealthy. This is following on to Citizens United, basically saying that if you've got money, you should have more of a right to influence the political process than anybody else. And, of course, that's not the way the nation was set up. And if you go back and you look at the donations of the leading candidates in the last election, you will see that more and more they are totally dependent on these gigantic multi-million-dollar paychecks, campaign checks, coming in from large corporations. They don't even bother with grassroots fundraising anymore because they know that you, the American people, you don't have enough money to stand up and compete with these giant corporations. And that's why this government is just running pell-mell down the road to complete utter fascism. And so how it works is the health insurance industry gives campaign donations to Obama. Obama wins. He sets up Obamacare so that more of your money is sucked out of your wallet and given to the health insurance corporations, who then turn around and write even bigger checks to politicians to make sure that nobody ever dares challenge the new order. We are not a capitalist nation any longer. We have devolved into outright, pure, total economic fascism. We are not a capitalist society any longer. The UN chemical weapons inspectors are going to return to Syria tomorrow to basically move forward on the Russia-Syria plan for identifying, locating, and destroying Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles. Now, you need to understand, Syria created those stockpiles not to attack people, certainly not to gas their own people, but as a counterbalance to Israel's nuclear arsenal. And one of the reasons that negotiations and diplomacy are facing a major problem is because here in the United States of America, the U.S. government still will not acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. And it's more than simple obeisance to Israel's will. Because under United States law, namely the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the government of the United States of America to send any of your tax money to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow IAEA inspections. And so the U.S. government can't admit that Israel has nuclear weapons, and they certainly can't admit that they've known it all along, because it means that all those billions and billions of dollars the government took from you to give to Israel were a crime committed by the United States government to rob you, to give to their cronies in Israel. All of it was illegal. Remember Obama's first press conference as president? And Helen Thomas, bless her, stood up and said, what nation in the Middle East has nuclear weapons right now? And Obama didn't answer the question. He hemmed and hawed and tap danced around and said, well, we're opposed to weapons of mass destruction anywhere in the Middle East. And he never answered the question. He knows Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. And that means he knows that every one of those checks he signs, full of your tax dollars going to Israel, is a crime under U.S. law. And because the United States cannot and will not acknowledge Israel's nuclear arsenal, their starting position is Syria doesn't really have a need for chemical weapons because Israel isn't a threat to them. Which is nonsense because Israel's a threat to everybody in the region. Have we forgotten the Golan Heights? Have we forgotten that Israel is already handing out oil development contracts for Syrian land they expect to take in the coming invasion? My goodness here. All righty, so that one from AIG really bothers me. The guy's out there saying, oh, the opposition to the bankers, that's just like lynching the blacks in the Deep South. One has got nothing to do with the other. They're just grasping at straws to reassure themselves they're the good guys, that the imaginary playmate in the sky they pray to meant for them to have all the wealth. And you know something? The entire history of war and politics on this planet comes down to two camps. Forget about notions like good, evil, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. The human race breaks down into two groups. Those who feel that all humans have an equal right to the blessings of life, and those who feel that they should own all the blessings of life and then rent them out to the rest of humanity. That's what it really all comes down to. Whether you call them socialists, communists, fascists, it always comes down to that. Now, I'm obviously in the camp that feels all human beings have a natural right to a share in life's blessings. And the other camp, the fascists, they want to be able to own it all, to stand on a temple built to their own glory and say, I'm king of the world, and you must pay me rent to live on my planet. I don't think that's a very good model for global government, and yet that does seem to be the way that we're heading here. All righty, let's see. DARPA is apparently investing $10 million developing bulletproof robotic mules. Oh, we talk about the boondoggles, and it underscores a reality as we court war with Russia and China. The U.S. may spend more money on mass death than the rest of the world, but they're spending it foolishly and recklessly. Robotic mules. The F-22 still asphyxiating its pilot. F-35 can't land on the carrier, can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog. Can't outfight the contemporary Russian planes. Ships like the USS San Antonio, which are borderline useless. They're just places to pour money on to enrich the defense contractors and the military-industrial complex. Which means if we do go to war against Russia and China, the fact that we spent much more money doesn't guarantee victory. Because our weapons don't really work very well. And again, if you've never seen it, there's a funny movie out there called The Pentagon Wars. It's based on a book by the same name. It's a very humorous look at the development of the infantry fighting vehicle. It is based on a true story. Richard Benjamin directed it, did a fabulous job. So if you can find that, that's a good evening's entertainment for you to watch about just what military procurement is all about here. Alrighty, I'm going to go into some science stories here. A real quick one. Apparently, NASA's JPL has just announced that the Curiosity rover finds no methane on Mars. Some people were saying, well, see, that proves there's no life on Mars, which is not a given. But I'm wondering if Curiosity has suffered an instrument failure because earlier they said they did detect methane, and other spacecraft have detected methane. Now, here on Earth, methane is mostly produced by deep crust microbes. And having lived through the GCMS fiasco on Viking, the possibility of an instrument failure cannot be ruled out, or an instrument design failure. Now, previous spectrographic studies and spacecraft have detected methane on Mars, including the European Space Agency's Mars Express Orbiter and NASA's Mars Global Surveyor. Now remember, there's a lot of perchlorate in that Martian soil, which would decompose methane, so it may just be curiosities in a methane-free area for the moment. But it's certainly far too early to declare Mars does not have any life. And based on what we learned in Viking, I have the contrary view. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our show today after these words from our sponsor. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the global warming crisis, which does not exist. And we've been talking over the last week about how the IPCC released a preliminary report which acknowledges what we all know from our own senses. The Earth did not actually get any warmer over the last 15 years, even though atmospheric carbon dioxide did increase a little tiny bit. And this is causing a huge problem for all those governments, all those politicians, all those documentary producers, all those universities, all those government agencies that signed onto the human-caused global warming hoax because they bet their reputations on this and said, yes, we're an authoritative scientific institution and we get lots of government money, so you should believe us when we tell you the world is roasting and it's your fault. And now we were talking about this story out of the Daily Mail where the world's top climate scientists have been told to cover up the fact that the world is not getting warmer, to find some way to go on and say, yes, it's still a crisis. The government of Hungary was out there worrying that the fact that there hasn't been any warming in the last 15 years would provide ammunition for those climate deniers, which they try and equate with Holocaust deniers. You don't believe the official story. What's wrong with you? So, yeah, the fact that the Earth has not gotten any warmer is going to bolster those of us who are asking very critical questions about this pseudoscience, this propaganda to trick us out of our carbon tax money and obedience, and it was all a fraud. Anybody who says there's no such thing as giant government conspiracies to defraud the people of planet Earth, there's one right here, staked out naked for you to study. Der Spiegel is now confirming that the government of Germany is lobbying the UN's IPCC to delete the information about how warming has not happened in the last 15 years from the final report. So all those institutions, NOAA, NASA, Penn State, Michael Mann, Hadley Climate Research Unit, all of those people bet their reputations on human-caused global warming, and it didn't bear out. 10 years ago, there were articles all over the press saying snow will be a thing of the past. We've had several record-setting winters since then, and it looks like we're going to have a really bad one this year because the degree of solar activity is like at a 100-year low. It looks like we're going into a new Maunder minimum and a new little ice age. And, of course, when the facts and the science fail you, what do? You fall back on the children. Over at The Guardian, they ran a story saying children are going to bear the brunt of climate change impact unless we act now. Now, the fact of the matter is, having completely blown their forecast, it's ridiculous for them to say we must follow thus and such policy to control the climate in the future. First of all, it should be obvious at this point they can't control the climate. Climate is controlled. It's dominated by the level of solar activity as the current minimum and coming cold winter are demonstrating. Secondarily, the Earth's orbit is not stable. In fact, there was this science show on last night talking about orbits, and they were going on about how wonderful it is that the Earth's orbit is stable. If it was just a little further out, we'd be covered in ice. And I said, what do you think the ice ages were? The Earth's orbit isn't stable. It oscillates between circular and elliptical over approximately 100,000-year cycles. And when it's more elliptical, because of Kepler's laws, the Earth spends more time further away from the Sun. And that's what gives you the ice ages. And then when the orbit becomes more circular, you get the interglacial periods, which is where we are right now. And unless and until the Carbonazis can control solar output or change the Earth's orbit, there isn't a thing they can do that's actually going to change future climate change. And they're just looking for reasons to keep pushing this lemon on the people of the world. They're saying, global warming's on a break, or it's hiding in the bottom of the ocean, or Antarctica is melting, but it's only melting at the bottom. I mean, some of the stuff they've come up with is just ludicrous. They're trying to come up with anything that will allow them to keep their reputations as being some kind of scientific body, even though they hoard their science to a political agenda. In a reasonable, realistic government, the science should drive the agenda, not the other way around. This is what science tells us is really happening, therefore we should react to it. But our government got it the other way around. We need a new crisis we can sell the people for carbon taxes. I know, we'll say the world is getting warmer. And we'll just throw enough money at scientists to stand up there and say, oh yes, we agree, the world is getting warmer, and they're all embarrassed by this. On September 21st, Antarctica had the most sea ice ever measured since they started keeping records. Satellites are showing the extent of southern hemisphere sea ice has increased dramatically since the start of keeping records in 1979. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, well, the ice may look like it's wider, but it's a lot thinner, too. It's really a lot thinner, so it's less ice. I mean, they're grasping at anything. Story out of the Daily Mail saying the Met Office global warming figures are fatally flawed and result in millions being squandered because they're taxing and spending millions to solve a problem that doesn't really exist, and even if it did, what they're spending the money on can't really change the outcome. And they're talking about malinvestment, spending money on things that cost a lot and won't actually control climate because they can't change solar output and they can't change the shape of the Earth's orbit. It was just a money-making opportunity. And most of them turned out to be costly boondoggles. Solar cell companies that couldn't pencil out. Everybody was building these huge wind farms. Because of tax subsidies, a lot of these wind farms got built in places that don't even have any wind. We've got a wind farm up on the north shore of Oahu that most of the time it's shut down because the turbines won't operate if the wind blows too much. And it turns out the most commonly used wind turbine for these projects was supposed to have a 25-year lifespan. They're already falling apart after just 5 years. And the original company's gone out of business, can't get parts for it. Remember what I said about the necessity of maintaining the overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. But everybody's thinking about the next scam. How do I make $1 zillion so I can retire to the Caymans? I want to retire a millionaire at age 30. That's not a realistic ambition for your life. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has now declared GMO contamination normal. And this is in response to the discovery that Monsanto's genetically modified alfalfa contaminated a GMO-free crop harvest. Guy was growing GMO-free alfalfa, took it to market, it was tested, found to contain altered genes. Huge financial hit on this guy. Wheat fields are being contaminated, corn fields are being contaminated, and the USDA is basically, it's a non-issue. We just have to accept that GMO is going to contaminate everything that you eat. You might as well get used to it. Does that include that epicite gene from that corn that was genetically engineered to sterilize people who eat it? GMO contamination is not normal. It is an industrial accident, and it should be treated as one. People have very good reasons for not wanting GMO in their diet. And by the way, part of Common Core, they're teaching in the schools, GMO is a miracle. It will feed the hungry. They're propagandizing our kids to think that GMO is perfectly safe, and we know it is not. This is the most dangerous technology that humankind has ever played with, and it's being treated and deployed recklessly in the name of quick profits. All right, there's the music. We're going to head on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. You got to get angry, folks. It's time to get angry. It's like that wonderful Howard Beale speech from the movie Network. First of all, you've got to get angry, and now's the time to do it, because anger will power what needs to be done to try and get this nation back to the republic it used to be. We're going to head on out of here. Please head over to republicbroadcasting.org. Hit that donate button. We need your help. I cannot underscore how much we need your help. Have a good day. See you tomorrow. Aloha, America.